Hello everyone, Kenti Tiger here with Bengali Engineering in Play. We are back in Space Engineers and kind of somewhat continuing on in the Survival Series 2. Now we have changed gears here a little bit and we are actually testing some of the various semi-vanilla, I'll call them, miners. This particular miner actually has a couple things that are not vanilla, and one of the things. Let me go ahead and just pull everything up here. Um, so um, So I was going through here. All the drills are vanilla. Obviously, the cameras are vanilla. I don't have any mods. I do have a couple mods that do cameras, but these are all the generic vanilla cameras. The batteries here are vanilla. So there's two cargo containers. One of them actually says cargo containers. This actually is a cargo container, cargo transmit. It is just coupled with this guy, which is enabling me to transmit cargo, so I don't have to actually stop. So this is one of the. So this guy here actually is the mod. So this is by Paycast, no longer being supported, but is being supported. So, like a lot of modders, they kind of drop out because, well, keeping mods working, and I know this from my own mod, keeping mods working with Space Engineers is a chore, and a frustrating chore because, well, Keen doesn't tell you when they're changing their API, and so it's very frustrating because things just break, and then you actually have to go in and figure out what's wrong, and that's always a pain in the butt when they don't tell you, oh hey, we're going to change this, and they don't tell you how they changed it. So not only the heads up of saying, hey, we're going to change this, but clear disclosure on, hey, this is how we change this. This is how things are going to be now. So anyway, so Paycast has a teleporter. There's actually three different teleporters, in fact. So there's three different mods by Paycast. One is a cargo teleporter that is dependent upon the RF antennas, so not the laser antennas, the RF antennas. So you can only transmit cargo at the distance of your regular RF antennas, which is 50 kilometers. So I preferred this one. Is it modded? Yes. Is it completely overpowered? No, I don't think so. And why do I like the cargo teleporters? Because I don't have to stop when I'm mining, go back, unload, come back. Now, yes, that would probably be something that you would do in the process of mining real world. But to me, I want to get out here and mine, and then transmit my cargo back without having to stop and actually go. Especially given a small vessel, you have to stop very frequently because you take in all this ore, and 5 minutes into it, you're done. You're full. I have to stop, go back, and do everything. So that's the downside of a small miner, is that you take in the material very, very quickly, and then you're full, and then you have to go and unload that material. So this cargo teleporter basically unloads that material for you. It transmits up to its cargo capacity every second. So just looking at things from an inventory perspective, teleporter. So this can teleport effectively the same amount. So 10-125. Let's go ahead and bring up a drill, which is 10-125. So it's basically the same cargo capacity as a drill. So it can empty out an entirely full drill every second, which is really neat. It's kind of set up to function as a, not kinda. It will function as a sorter. So it will pull stuff through exactly as a sorter would do, but everything that goes into the chamber, the storage of the teleporter, will actually teleport to the other side if you have it configured. Otherwise, it behaves as as a sorter. So in this case, it pulls everything in and transmits it back to my station, and then gets rid of it. So in this case, what I have done is I'm using this particular thing, and we have some ice here, which is all right. Clearly, the ice generator in this case is a Kenti generator. So actually, I was in there looking around. So the cargo transmit, this is a standard medium container, and the medium container happens to be on the lower side. This one happens to be on the upper side. So there's only 2 medium containers in here, but they are vanilla medium containers. Then the teleporter, which actually takes stuff out of those containers, this one specifically, but it pulls in from everywhere because it's set as drain all, as you can see here on the screen, drain all. Blacklist nothing, which means accept everything. Right. So cargo transmit my 2 containers, which happen to be on this machine, but because this is acting as a sorter, or behaves in the same manner as a sorter would when you push that drain all, it pulls everything in. So it's sucking it all out of the drills, everything, container, cockpit, doesn't matter where it is, it pulls it in. So the gas generator, yeah. So you see here, this is clearly a Kenti gas generator, which I presumed it was. Hydrogen tank is the small ship hydrogen tank, so OP also as well. So definitely got a little bit of. So a couple things that are Kenti mod. So definitely a Kenti mod. All the hydrogen thrusters on the ship are Kenti mod, very, very obviously. We have a port and starboard side refinery, the other R. And then we have an ore detector, which is also a Kenti ore detector, because I can tell by this. And this has a slider that goes out to 500. So I have a modded version of the ore detector. Now, ore detection has gotten a lot better. There was a time where if you ran this out to, so the vanilla ore detectors are 150 meters, right? So 150 meters in a radius now. So 150 meters in any direction, it will detect it. And they did that because you got over that 150 range, even out into the 200 range, and it started really lagging the hell out of your machine. And they have actually improved things a little bit to the point where it's not nearly as laggy, so you can actually run this at 250 and not really have a problem. I can even go out to the 500. Where it really became a problem was on the planets, because there's so much material there. It's entirely voxels, right? So you have so much material that it has to kind of decipher in this radius pattern, and ultimately it's a full spherical scan. So when you have out to 1,000 meters or my biggest one, which I just completely stopped using because at one time it would actually freeze the game, was a 2,500 meter. And I loved the 2,500 meter because out in space you could actually get within a certain range of the asteroids, and it would detect what was on those asteroids, and you could look at it, oh, okay, that's what this is, and I can say, well, I have all that, so I don't need to go there. So it was really neat. So out in space, it's actually not bad. It works pretty well. But since they have done the optimization and that sort of thing, they have actually improved. They've improved the ore detection process a lot, to the point where you could actually use the 250 and the 500 on a planet surface, and it will actually do okay. Now, I'm not sure exactly the mechanics of how they do it, but one of the things I noticed, even with the 1,000 meter, the 1 kilometer and 1.5 kilometer versions that I have here, it does freeze the game. So while it's doing its initial detection, nothing else happens. It totally locks up the game. But once it's done with what it's doing, then it actually gets really stuttery for a little bit, and I think it's putting all that in some internal database or something, and then it's there. And once it's there, it as far as I can tell, it doesn't actually really rescan. And the only time it rescans is when it's detecting that you have actually changed the voxels within its radius, and then it rescans where you're at. So it's like it's doing a very focused rescan, so it doesn't get nearly as stuttery. So I have successfully used the 1 and the 1.5 kilometer versions of the ore detector with minimal issues. I don't want to say no issues because it does lag the hell out of your game, but so I've done a little bit of experiment, and that may be one of the tutorials that we want to do later on, is to actually do some playing with that. Planets, of course, have their own unique aspects. They do add some very significant lag into the game just by their very presence. So planets are just one of those really kind of interesting things. All right, so this is modded, but not entirely modded. So there is a lot of stuff here on this mod or on this miner, the other M, that are normal, the vanilla stuff. So the drills, for example, the thrusters obviously are not. The batteries are normal. Anyway, I'm really, even though boring into the silver there was intentional, so we'll go ahead and turn these off. I'm really just kind of trying out some of these various miners. So let's see what this guy is doing, just out of curiosity. So we have a lot of ice there. Port and starboard reactors are full, and then we have both the refineries actually had silver and stone. So we've done all those. So let's go back out here. We're going to turn the refineries off. We're going to go ahead and turn the transmitter on, and hopefully we will get everything. So we'll go ahead and hide empty just because, and hopefully that will move everything out. So we have the gravel going out. Our other refinery already has emptied. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that we have in this particular miner. So what I'm going to do, I verify my drills are off because I don't want to die as I go out, because this cockpit here is directly in front of the drills. So we're going to go ahead and Control X and delete this. And then we're going to bring in, it is actually a vanilla miner, but it's a large grid miner, and we're going to test this out just for fun. So facing the wrong direction, so let's get it pointed here in the right direction. I also want to see, all right, so this is right side up relative to the camera view right now. One of the things that I do want to go ahead and put onto this thing here is this is a cargo container, and this is entirely vanilla. So this entire vessel right now is using entirely vanilla blocks. There are no modded blocks on this particular thing, but I did add in a cargo container that's called cargo transmit. So I actually set this up so I could put on a cargo transmitter, and that's what I'm gonna take just a second to do right now. So let me go ahead and do a G. We're gonna go down here to Paycast, grab a cargo transmitter assembly here, and we're gonna get this facing the correct direction. We're gonna face it this way, and I also want the control panel, which you see here on the corner. And the other thing I'm going to do is get my Tiger Orange put back in here. So Tiger Orange, it's facing out, so you can see the arrow there facing to the left, which means I'm going to pull in from the left side out to the right side. Sorry, the other left. So it's pointing to the right, which means it takes in material from the left and pushes out towards the right. So the antenna, or the arrow, does play a very important role here. Next thing we're going to do is actually put in an elbow, a curved conveyor, as it's called in the game here. 90-degree elbow to anybody who's ever worked with plumbing. All right, okay, we're going to go ahead and turn this off for right now. The reason I'm going to turn that off is because I want to set it all up inside, but I also want to load this thing down a little bit because I've played with this a little bit and tested, and it really does work. It's got, I think, 5 large containers, and we'll do some investigating with that to see how much it is. So my standard configuration here is transmit or to, as Paycast defines the T and the F, to and from. So in this case, we're transmitting to elsewhere, EYR, sorry, I gotta spell it right, receiver, which is actually on the station. So elsewhere receiver, that's a container on the station with this name. And we turn it off, but we also want to do a drain all in this case. So let's see what this guy has. So this guy already has the cargo container named cargo transmit, cargo exmit, and the counterpart to this teleporter, which is the receiver teleporter on the station, has the from cargo transmit in it. So it uses that name on the other side to designate that's the cargo container that it's going to pull material out of. So these work in pairs on both ends, so the transmit side pair and the receiver side pair, which is why I say this is my standard configuration. You can do whatever name you want. It doesn't matter. It's very flexible. So once you understand that these are working in pairs, but they're pairs, they're pairs that are spread out across this distance. So you actually have a teleporter that's transmitting to a particular container on your other end, whatever that happens to be, and then you actually have the reverse of that, so you have a teleporter that is pulling from a particular container. So it's a pair that you need on both ends, but it's actually the interaction between the pair on the opposite ends that makes this all work how it does. And I've actually done some experimenting where you actually don't have a teleporter on one end or the other, and this system will still work. Or it did still work. I haven't tested recently. There's been several breaks and repairs since then. But so we have these batteries, and these batteries are standard batteries. You can tell by the 4 megawatt here. That's a standard battery. And all of my batteries, I turn off the auto, because I do not like the way the auto works. I really don't. Auto will cycle from top to bottom, just like it says here. So if you have semi-auto, then when it reaches the bottom, it will go into recharge mode with full demand of power. And if you are not expecting that power, then it will really hose you. In the case of not semi-auto, then it will take in the power as it has it, as it needs it, gets up to 100%, and then shuts down. But it will only use a little bit of power. So that's the neat thing about the batteries when they're cycling. So obviously a boatload of batteries here, which is a good thing. So this does have an awful lot of battery power. We have 5 big containers. So we have the aft container, the forward container, then we have the mid one, which is aft, the mid center, and then the mid forward. So we have 5 in a row containers. Then we have a cargo container, which is actually not really doing anything. It's a small container, but it's a container. And then we have our cargo transmit here, which is part of this teleport pair. We have our cockpit. We have our port and starboard connectors in this case, and we have a conveyor sorter. Now the point of the conveyor sorter is actually just to pull all of that material out of the drills and push it into, in this case, the front container. Now the downside is if that front container fills up, this sorter stops working, and that's a problem with the sorter. The sorter is directly connected to the front, not any of the others. So unfortunately what happens is if a container that is connected directly onto a sorter fills up, the sorter stops because it will not push through. It only pushes into this container that it's directly connected to. Now the way around that is you build basically a header, a manifold structure where you have the sorter going into a conveyor system that has multiple containers attached. Therefore, if one of them fills up, it just starts filling into the next one. So you can get around that, but that's one of those little quirky things about the sorters is once they fill up the container they're directly attached to, they stop sorting because they don't have any place they can move that material. So we have all the drills. In this case, all the drills are vanilla drills. So this whole thing, vanilla gyros. Now the gyros have gotten to be a lot more powerful over the years. So originally, to make a massive ship, you had to have a massive number of gyros, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. Now, physics being physics, gyroscopes. So this is kind of a discussion, and if you're familiar with mechanical engineering, this is all going to make sense to you. If you're not really familiar with mechanical engineering, then this is probably going to be a lot of gobbledygook. But ion thrusters are a direct force mechanism. Okay, so whatever direction the ion thruster is pointed in, then it will apply force in a diametrically opposed direction. So if I have it pointed aft, it's going to push forward, right? So it applies force directly in line with the orientation of the thruster. And all thrusters are this way. Now, the physics of space engineers is a little bit different. So it calculates the center of mass for the grid, and then it takes all the thrusters as a whole and then applies the force in the direction that the thruster is facing to the center of mass. Okay, so it simplifies things. You can actually have a totally unbalanced ship. In other words, you could be, all the thrusters are on the starboard side, and center of world or center of mass in the real world would have that spinning in a circle. In fact, it would spin to port because you have all this force thrust on the starboard side, but mass is mass. So you're going to move that around basically in a big circle. But because we're applying in space engineers, and there's some smart to that, it greatly simplifies the force calculations. Okay, so I know why they did it. Just from a physics perspective, it greatly simplifies the calculations. This is a computer program. Every calculation takes a certain amount of CPU time. So if it has to calculate thrust and thrust vectors according to actual mass distribution, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of calculations per second just to correctly work the orbits of your ship. So anyway, again, I know why it does it. Gyroscopes, on the other hand, so thrusters, direct application of force in a particular direction, right? Gyroscopes are entirely a moment arm application of force. So it's a twisting force, in other words. If I roll my mouse to the left or the right, I'm twisting around this center of mass. So it's still applying the force to the center of mass, but it's a twisting force. So whether I shift around the orbit one way or the other. So gyros, um, from a physics perspective, gyros have a very, very difficult job because a moment arm application of force requires an awful lot of energy. Um, and what I mean by that is you're talking about an extremely short moment arm here. So to move something of significant mass around the orbit of this moment arm requires an incredible amount of force. Obviously, this force, if you think this is lever mechanics, right? Lever mechanics. That's all a moment arm. Moment arm is obviously a mechanical engineering term, but a moment arm, if you imagine, is just a lever, and the power and glory of a lever is that you have a big long bar attached to your fulcrum, and you have this great big huge arm that ultimately turns into force along that arm, much like a pulley, just kind of the opposite of a pulley. Instead of pulling, we're pushing. But we have this great big huge long moment arm ultimately that uses this lever force to actually act against something over our fulcrum. So gyroscope is just a big lever fulcrum type mechanic, moment arm mechanics, moment arm mechanical engineering. So if we think about things in terms of the gyroscope, obviously a very, very small device. It's a 1 by 1 by 1 block that's having to apply this twisting force. So the amount of energy required to actually make this force is significant. So you have to have a bazillion gyros to actually apply a significant amount of force. So gyros. So gyros have gotten better. In this case, there's 6 gyros on here, and actually this machine is pretty peppy when it comes to moving around, even with these 6 gyros. Now, once it gets fully loaded, that's a completely different story because mass is mass. When we're moving just the mass of the ship, not a huge deal. When we're moving the mass of the ship and all the cargo, completely different animal. All right, so that's what we have. All the ion thrusters. This is entirely ion thrusters, so it is absolutely and completely useless. So the oxygen generator here, the gas generator here, is just for the cockpit. Okay, so it's just for the miner, the space engineer. Oxygen tank, same thing. Just this thing providing some storage, and then we have our standard ore detector, which goes out to up to 150. So we're going to roll that all the way out there. I'm not sure why I didn't do that before. The only other thing I'm going to do is check, and that's because I put those 2 new devices on there. And actually, only one of them matters when it comes to ownership, because the conveyor system actually isn't an owned type of thing. All right, so everything is me. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the hidden things, which is really to say turn everything back to the way it was. And right now this is off, so it's red. And the reason I want this to be off is because I actually want to configure it on here. So we're going to go ahead and T in here. So we have 2 different groups set up here, and I'm going to go ahead and go into the G menu so we can see what these are. So this is my main thrusters, and this is actually my maneuvering thrusters. Now, turning on and off your mains is a good thing, which is why I build, when I build these things, that actually has a maneuvering set of thrusters. I create that maneuvering group, but I never really use it. So the only thing, those stay on, and they are a group, but I never have to turn those on and off. The only reason you would turn those on and off is if you're actually parking the ship and leaving it and you don't want it to be burning power. But you can do the same thing by turning off the reactor. So that Y button, which just turns everything off. So in this case, what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to take that slot and I'm going to put my cargo teleporter into that slot. And this is going to be a toggle block on and off. And the reason why, again, is because I don't really need to be able to control those maneuvering thrusters. Um, they're on. So even if I turn them off and I only use those for docking, even if I turn those guys off, then that would gain me nothing because I need those. So when I need that fine point control, then I turn off my mains, so the maneuvering thrusters, which is their entire function, is now I'm down to either a single or a pair of thrusters in any given direction. And I'm not sure what this one actually has, but we'll find that out in just a moment. So I don't really need the ability to turn on and off my maneuvering thrusters, because those are always going to be on. But it's that main group that I want to be able to turn off. So let's go ahead and do a V, zoom out just a little bit, and what I really want to do is see if I turn off my mains, what does that actually do? So it's actually 2 thrusters in every direction. Not entirely true, but you can see I've got my port and starboard. I only have 2. Up and down is only 2, but actually forward and aft is 4. So forward and aft is 4. So it really does kill all the other thrusters. The 2 things that this particular vessel does not have, one is what I kind of like to call a mining thruster, and the neat thing about the mining thruster is it's a thruster dedicated to mining. It always keeps a constant force moving forward. And the way you do that is you use that thrust override. You pick a thruster out of the entire group, and you have that set up on your toolbar as a mining thruster. It is off. And then you get mining, and it will then you have the adjustment. You can turn it on or off, and then you adjust it so it just provides enough force to keep you moving forward in a straight line. On the bigger miners, that actually comes in really handy because they're not as prone to twisting side to side. So it's definitely a good thing there. All right. So you can see here now this is empty, but you can see this is actually a very gentle gyro control. So with those 6 gyros, it actually does have a lot. Obviously, if I really tweak it, it goes quite a bit. So with all of my thrusters on here, you can see we don't move very fast. So this machine is pretty heavy. And what I want to do here is line up approximately on the hole that I did with the other miner. Let's go ahead and twist this around here so we're almost symmetrical. Let me move this to be a little more centered with everything. So we're basically going to line up on the same hole here and get twisted around a little bit, move over to line up kind of on our center, and then we're going to go up. So we're going to mine right into approximately the same hole. All right, there we go. All right, so having done that, we're going to, for right now, leave our cargo transmitter off. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the detector, so we're seeing the silver and the uranium again, and then turn my drills on and then start moving forward. So unfortunately, the way this is designed, and let me go ahead and swivel around so we can see this actually, is this whole plate, this whole gigantic plane here of drills, the 49 drills, so it's a 7x7 grid, is flat. And what I mean by that is there are no deviations there. It's absolutely planar. So I don't have a camera up there. I in fact do not have the cockpit you see is behind the drills. So the idea is this drill ship is capable of tunneling, which is important, but it didn't have any way, because of the way the drills are now. The drills used to have about a half a block uh, gap around them, and so you could actually, with a drill on one side, a gap of something, so be it your cockpit or something else, and then a drill on the other side. The two drills on the sides would actually cover that entire gap. The drills no longer do that. They only go about a quarter of a block on each side, so you can't even really have cameras off the side, because you'll scrape the cameras off. So it's kind of one of those really strange things that the new vanilla drills really don't, they don't do a whole lot as far as um, distance around them anymore. So what I want to do is drop my nose down just a little bit, because I want to line up with the approximately the same hole. So I'm going to go up a little bit. So I put my drill face here all the way around. There we go. Let me zoom in just a hair so I can see. Now the nice thing about this drill, this particular miner actually has a fairly low thrust to weight ratio. And what I mean by that is my thruster force versus the weight of the miner is actually pretty close. And that's good and it's bad. It's bad because you don't have nearly, you can't just, it's not a sports car, so you can't just, put the throttles wide open and zoom you're up to speed. On the other side of that equation is that you actually have an incredible amount of finesse and maneuverability using your thrusters, because it's got this very, very low thrust to weight ratio. Not very low, but low thrust to weight ratio. You have a lot of finite control over things. So rather than thrust and instantly I go forward and bounce my drills off the rock face, this doesn't do that. I have finite control of the drills, and I can much more effectively go in a completely straight line and never actually bump my drills off the rock face. So that's one advantage of having a lower thrust to weight ratio, is you end up with a lot more fine point control of your drills. Now you can bounce your drills off the rock face, no question there. But this, because of the weight, is not as subject to that whole, zoom forward and bounce that you were seeing, for example, on the 14 drill, which had those two big thrusters on the back. It was too much. The thrust to weight ratio was so high in that case that I would thrust forward, bounce off the rock, and then come off at a random direction, which then made it very difficult to work in a straight line. Whereas this machine here, because the thrust to weight ratio is smaller, much more evenly matched, then I'm going to be able to bore through this thing very well without going off sideways. So mining, as always, is a very is a patience requiring endeavor. So mining is just one of those things in space engineers that it's absolutely necessary. There is no way around it. You need those resources, but it requires an awful lot of patience. It is just one of those tedious tasks that comes with, I need my resources, so I have to go out and mine them. So this is that portion of the gameplay that is that tedious portion that you just have to endure. Now, this here, you may or may not be able to hear it with the microphone pickup, but I'm clicking my W key about every second, and I just touch and move on. And the idea is that I want to keep that constant forward motion on my drills. So my drills will take off a piece of the rock face, and then I move forward, take off another piece, move forward, take off another piece. So I basically have this steady forward motion. One of the things I wish that they would incorporate into the autopilot would be basically a thrust mode, that it would keep it at a particular, so it wouldn't change the orientation of the vessel, but it would maintain a particular speed, just maintain a speed. And in my case, I would set it at about a half a meter per second, and then done. So I wish that this thing would, I wish there was a mechanism to do that. Let me go ahead and look. So we're drilling. We are clearly taking in silver in this case. So I want to see where all these different drills are. So you see I'm taking in the material and it vanishes. That's because the sorter is working. There's a main sorter that's pulling in all this material. And hopefully that sorter is down here at the bottom. So cargo container is the large forward is pulling material in. It's almost full. We have the reactors here, and I'm not seeing the sorter actually doing anything, but it may actually just be how about sorter? Yeah, so it is actually functioning. So what it's doing is pulling out of the drills and shoving it backwards into, it's directly connected onto that front container. So in this case, it's kind of a cooperative effort, that even though the sorter is pulling stuff out of the drills also ought to push. So the drills will push material out. So hopefully one of the things that will happen as this thing is doing what it's doing is not just stop functioning once I fill up that forward container. But that's part of what this test is all about, to actually see what will happen in the case of this guy when we fill it up. This is entirely ion thrust, so one of the things you see is my thrust go up to 60 something. So that's 60% of my capacity, which may or may not be a good thing. So that definitely using a bit of energy there. This is actually mining a lot faster than I would have expected it to mine. Oop, I did hit. So probably forward thrust a little too fast. The nice thing about the tunnel kind of miners, the boring miners, is there was a hit. They tend to do a straight line, and if you build them so the drill faces are basically the same width as the vessels, you end up working everything pretty well. Now it used to be you could destroy your ship on the way through, and they've actually improved a lot of things to the way the blocks interact with the voxels and everything. It's not every hit does an incredible amount of damage anymore. So in this case, we hit every once in a while, and then it would, shift our angles just a little bit. So the goal here, and this is going to take a little while, would have been to go. That was another hit. I'm being a little overzealous here. Actually, in this case, I mined through the silver. So this was apparently a silver asteroid with a rock cover that pounded into another asteroid. So we're now out of the silver and into the more jagged rock area. So we're just taking in rock in this case. Now, one of the things I want to go ahead and look at is let's go ahead and see how our containers are behaving here. Container. So what you can see is our large forward and then our large mid forward. And we have already pushed material in through the second one here, and in through the third, and in fact I'm slowly filling that aft container. Okay, so the good news is I am pushing the material all the way through, but we are very, very slowly filling up everything. So now that I've almost filled up, so now we're working on filling this last container. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my transmitter, and it should start pulling in a portion of that material at a time, and then transmitting it over to my station. So if everything goes well, let's go ahead and look into our containers once again. So containers, and so here's that mid forward, which was full before, is actually unloading. Now why is it unloading from here is because it's actually that's the one this is pulling from first. So very slowly we're emptying this out, but we are in fact transmitting all of our materials out. So we're no longer filling this one up. It's pushing through, and then slowly emptying out this container. And once it empties that container out, then it's going to start pulling in from these other containers. Of course, this one, because it's that forward one, is emptying and then pulling right back in. So with that having been said, and now that we know that this is actually functioning, I'm going to start mining again. And the goal here, even though it's really, really boring, is to bore through the entire center of this thing and come out the other side. And once I've done that, then we might actually shift up to a slightly different kind of miner, and I'll show you what I mean by that when we get there. So there's a reason why I have my favorite little miner, and my favorite little miner is a completely Kenti mod miner, and I use it because it allows me to still do mining, but cut down on a little bit of the tediousness of mining. So again, here the goal is to move my way through all the way from side to side, and eventually we're going to, it says we're 12 meters away from iron, so hopefully we will get into iron shortly, because we do need some iron back on the station as well. Now I did have a whole lot of material on the station there, so I was not hurting for anything in particular. So what I may do when we really get kind of into the actual gameplay, so we're doing a lot of testing and messing around with things at this point. The building of the station, the building of the ground station, the messing around with different miners and everything was really kind of part of, I don't want to call it experimenting, but my initial phase of the series. And even though we have an awful lot of I wonder what I'm seeing. I think is that silver? Yeah, I guess it's still just silver. It looks like I'm mining through silver again. Yeah, I am. So this asteroid actually has several veins of silver in it, which is neat. Eventually, I want to get to the uranium as well, but I got myself sidetracked. What I will probably do, and this is mostly because I mean you really want to kind of have a purpose to the game. So my two purposes to the game was I want to set this so I have actual encounters, and we're going to do that in two ways. There's a Reddit mod that basically takes a lot of workshop exploration mods and combines them into it basically takes the vanilla cargo ship portion of the game and turns it into a rather extravagant cargo ship portion of the game. So the cargo ships behave the same way, but it's just a huge variety of them, from great big huge ships to very, very small ships, plus the vanilla game ships. So it was kind of this neat way of being able to allow the different fantastic ships builds that are out there on the workshop, vanilla builds, to be inserted into the game much more so than these, not much more so, but in addition to there was like 6 cargo ships, so they got really boring really fast. And so having this huge variety of ships available in the game is actually really neat. But it's basically the same cargo ship, so non-AI kind of a thing, other than the turrets and stuff like that might be embedded into the ships. So, but pure vanilla builds. So that was the Reddit encounters mod. The other one is it's called Corruption PvE, and it's a completely new faction called Corruption, and these are ships that are drones mostly, that are entirely AI controlled, and they are pretty smart AIs. They will hunt you down. So they're not like the standard, vanilla builds in the game. These guys will come after you. There's a bunch of different ones. There's hacking drones that will actually hack into your systems and turn off your shielding systems and your projectors, the rebuild, the build and repair systems. I mean, it turns off all kinds of things. But the glory of it is that obviously if you don't have those mods installed in your particular game, then it doesn't mess with those at all. So it's actually really neat in how it works. So those are the two mods that I want to turn on, and what that ultimately will enable me to do is I can go pirating, basically, and steal these vessels, and then come back, drop them off, and dismantle them, and that will give me my source of components. And then as I do mining and that sort of thing, then I will be able to get materials that ultimately will also be able to be refined into usable materials, and then ultimately be used also for creating components. And then once I have those components, what I want to do is build a fairly large transport ship, and whether that is by virtue of pasting a projectorized version of something into the world, and welding it, whether it be the build and repair system or hand welding, then building a fairly large scale transport ship, and then working my way over to the Mars like planet, and then building a base on that planet. And once I have the base built on that planet, then basically the ship will park in orbit. I will be able to shuttle up and down. I'll have to figure out how to do my shuttling up and down. And that may be part of the build, which will be interesting, is to build like a transport ship that I will literally have large pods that will detach and have parachutes on them, and then drop down to the ground and hopefully be somewhere near the base, and then I'll have to have some sort of small ship, planetary shuttle or something that would go out to these things, pick up all the materials, and then haul them back to whatever my base building site is. So the idea is to bring materials across, and then be able to somehow get those materials onto the planet, and then use those materials ultimately to build a base on the planet, maybe very similar to the one I have already on the Earth-like planet, and then from there put a teleport system in, so I will be able to teleport back to not only the space station, but all the way back to the other planet, and then go forward from there. So ultimately, the goal would be to reach the alien planet, even though I tend to hate alien planets, mostly because spiders. Don't like spiders. If there's one particular creature that I don't care for, definitely the spiders. So again, mining is really that rather tedious thing that we do. Just part of collecting resources. Used to be we could kind of cheat a little bit and put things like landing gear on the outside that would actually protect a lot of things, because the landing gear could take an awful lot of force before it would actually get destroyed. One of the other things that I saw a lot of people do was actually put wheels on the outside, so you would actually hit up against the surface and the wheel would roll, so it would take a lot of that force. So a lot of really neat ideas that have evolved over the time. And the neat thing about some of those things, anything that keeps that force, from damaging your ship, the bouncing off of things, and then you set up a forward thruster using that thrust override, and you just keep that steady pressure forward. So as your drills drill the rock face, then it's already got that thrust pushing on it. And you can literally, you turn that thrust override mechanism on, and you walk away. So it's actually kind of neat in methodology, because you have a really semi-auto type of a miner that will mine through, core through an asteroid, and then go out the other side. And if you really get creative, then you put a sensor in that senses when the asteroid is no longer there, and it turns off that thrust override miner, or that thrust override thruster. So you can do a lot of really neat and creative things. There was one miner that was a modded miner that it actually, as you came up on the face, it turned your drills on for you, and turned on a thrust override thruster. And then when it got to the other side, when it could no longer sense asteroid, then it would turn that thrust override thruster off and turn your drills off. Um, so it was really neat, and I had a lot of fun with it. Um, the only downside to it is I didn't build in a mechanism to turn it all off. So when you were doing, trying to do purely manual mining with it, everything, all the mechanisms built in to make it semi-automatic would of course take over. So you come up on a rock face and you're just kind of, okay, I'm just going to sit here and go get my coffee. Then it would turn your miner drills on and start plowing through, the side of the asteroid, even though, okay, that's not exactly where I wanted this to go. Oops. So there were some problems with it, but in the end it was okay. The question is, I'm going to go into this because I don't remember seeing nickel on this particular one. So silver, iron, nickel, and uranium. But this one was silver. So I had silver here. So maybe I didn't. Maybe that's not that one. Silver, iron, nickel, uranium. So maybe that is that one. Did I not? Having all kinds of issues here. $148 meters, which is okay. Nope, that one. That is this one. So I'm actually that is the one that I'm thinking it is. So let me go ahead and getting my. All right. So it is already set up, even though that was a strange camera game there. So just for playing around here, so I'm going to turn off the drills, and the reason I turn off the drills is because I'm going to get out of this. We're going to go back here. We should have just enough room to cruise through. So here's what I want to do. We have this center thruster here, and I don't know what that center thruster actually is, so what I'm going to do here is go into number 8, G, and we have thrusters. So we have a hyper thruster here, which is a mod thruster. So let me do thrusters. So these are all the different types of thrusters. Kinty small thruster, which we don't want. This is an ion thruster. So the ion thrusters is what we want here. In this case, it's a small. It's a small large grid thruster. And what I want to do is, so this is a 7 by 7 grid, so it's the same 49 grid, and I'm going to delete that one. And the reason I deleted that one is I want to get it out of, so make sure I'm in my Kenty Tiger Orange there. and I put this back in. So why did I do this? So this takes it out of the main, my main thruster group. And the other thing it does is lets me see what it is. So let me okay, let me go up here. There we go. Gotta get in here somehow. All right. So I can do, I think, all of this from inside the cockpit here. So I want a K, which will bring up everything. I'm going to go ahead and turn. I'm going to unhide everything. So we're going to go ahead and go and do a me. Strangely enough, that thruster. So this thruster here, strangely enough, is set to me. I don't know. That's interesting. Would not have expected that. So me, it's already set to me, which is, I guess, a great thing. So this is an ion thruster. It happens to be 150, and this is my mining thrust. So I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to put it into a group. And then the other thing that we're going to do with that, I'm going to G. This is this mining thruster now, and I'm going to use this as a thrust override. So this is going to be a toggle on and off. What we're going to do on toolbar 2 is actually do the same thing here, and this is a thrust override decrease and a thrust override increase. And what we want to do is initially this is going to be turned off. So we go back over to number 1, we do a 9, and then over to a toolbar 2, and I want to increase this slowly. So there's 14 kilonewtons, which is not as in fact, let's go ahead and do the same thing here again. We'll put in a toggle on off so we can actually control this and do a little testing here. So I'm off on my main mining screen, which is not so good, but we're tuning it. So we'll turn our drills back on. Let's go over to number 2. We're going to turn on this this thruster, which is on, and it is barely enough to make us move, but it is speeding up. So this is good and bad. We're going very, very slow, but at the same time it's speeding up. So the ideal is to have this low enough that we're not going to increase. So what I want to do is we'll go ahead and go to this mining thruster, and I'm going to decrease this. So I'm going to go down to, I'm going to say 5 kilonewtons, 4 kilonewtons here, and what I want to do is get to the point where I'm actually not speeding up. So there's my half of, I'm still just slightly speeding up. So K, once again, mining thrust. Now unfortunately this sets it into a percent. Oh, it changed. So let's go 3,500 here. I'm still speeding up just slightly. Okay, once again, we'll go to 2,500 as thrust. So this is a control, left click, and let's go to 2.5 kilonewtons. I'm gonna slow down. We are still speeding up, just slightly, and keeping in mind, most likely we have completely eliminated all of the material in our storage, in our cargo containers. So very likely, so let's go to 1.5 kilonewtons here. And we're still speeding up. So again, the physics being the weird things that they are. You would think that once you drop down in thrust, then you would ultimately reach the point of balance where your thrust to weight ratio would be 1, and it would just maintain movement. In this case, even though I have changed now, 2 entire kilonewtons of force, we're still speeding up, which is what I did not want. Don't want it to continue speeding up. I want it to be absolutely static, and I'm not sure we can achieve that. Okay, maybe we can. So there, we're not changing any. Yeah, we are. Okay, we'll go down to 0.5 kilonewton. Again, the idea here is just to keep enough forward motion that those drills we're mining, keeping those drills up against the rock face, but not enough to actually dramatically change the direction of the vessel. So I appear to be out of ice because I'm no longer pulling ice from slowing down dramatically, and the perspective is shifting. Sure what's happening here, but it's like I'm shifting sideways, and this might be that bug where you actually shift. The drills go through the voxels without actually going through the voxels, so it's this game bug where the drills actually go through the voxels, as in they have gone through the surface of the voxel, as in they've merged with the voxels, and apparently not. Right, so let me get back on to number 1. We'll turn the drills off. We'll come out of the thing here, and then go forward and see what the heck happened here. So we're clearly back into the rock, and nickel on this side. So we went from iron to nickel at some point. Still fairly straight, so let's see what's going on here. Alright, relight the drills. We'll turn back on our little thruster here, which isn't even enough to get us moving, in fact. So let's do the K, our mining thrust here, which is in fact on, and we'll go back up to 2500. Very slowly moving us forward. And we'll do the K, and do 500. And then we do this halt, and so I'm not sure exactly what that is. I saw a spark of some kind there. And then we're doing this shift to port. So I guess where our auto push thing gets a little wonky is when we have different materials. So as I was mining through all that iron, then the density of the material in front of the drills is always the same. So I didn't have any change in force. But as I got into the different materials like the stone, and ultimately the nickel, which is on the port side of the ship here, then I now have a bunch of different densities, and apparently it will no longer drill forward in quite the same fashion. I don't know why that is, but space engineers being space engineers, I guess. So we have the rock, the rock and the nickel. There's another hit. But ultimately we're into the rock, so we know we're going to come out the other side here very shortly. So the only other thing that I really want to hit at some point is uranium. I want to find that uranium deposit and then start my way through that. So if there's any irony to be had, I started out with different miners, babbled a little bit, and then started boring through the whole thing, and here we are an hour later, overtime once again, and I haven't even managed to bore through to the outside. So with that having been said, I want to chop this off here because I'm already way over time. So this is Kenty Tiger signing off. Thank you for watching, and we will talk to you next time.